Cianne, not yet, wait, hold your applause, please. Cianne Fragione is SMC MOA's featured artist for the 2024-25 academic year. The exhibit, Isole, A Voyage Among My Dreams, is on view in the museum from September 18th, so yesterday, all the way through to June 22nd. Cianne is influenced by her Italian heritage. She draws on personal and cultural experiences during her creative process. She received her MFA in Painting Mixed Media at John F. Kennedy University Fiberworks Center for the Arts in Berkeley. Over 5 decades, she has developed work that crosses boundaries between abstract painting and sculpture, navigating a wide range of artistic mediums. In addition to the exhibition at St. Mary's College Museum of Art, her work has been shown extensively in national and international venues. Fragione has been the recipient of awards, fellowships, and residencies, including Art OMI, receiving the Milton and Sally Avery Arts Fellowship, the Legacy Project, Saving the Legacy, sponsored by the Joan Mitchell Foundation, Studio dei Nipoti, Artist Residency in Monasteraci, Italy, Soaring Gardens in Laceyville, Pennsylvania, Spoleto Study Abroad in Spoleto, Italy, and an Artist in Institution grant project of the California Arts Council. She was nominated for the Joan Mitchell Painting and Sculpture Award and the Anonymous Was a Woman Award for Artistic Achievement. Join me in welcoming Cianne. Britt Royer is the curator at St. Mary's College Museum of Art, and the current exhibition, Isole, A Voyage Among My Dreams. She has written and organized several group exhibitions, including Collective Memories, Stone Cuts from Cape Dorset in 2021, Fake It Till You Make It, A Quest for Authenticity in 2022, and Visceral Processes in 2024, as well as solo exhibitions, including Hold It Lightly with Lisa Congdon in 2023, and Omega Alpha, Armonia Rosales in 2024. Royer is a board member and co-representative of the Western Region on the Association of Academic Museums and Galleries. They hold an MA in Art History from the University of California, Davis. Please join me in welcoming Britt. One last thing to mention, the format of our conversation today is roughly 30 to 40 minutes of dialogue, and then we're actually going to open up to the floor for questions, which we strongly encourage. We want to talk with all of you. Please help yourself to the refreshments. I also just want to give a plug. There is a publication that goes with this magnificent exhibition, and it is on sale in the museum, which is open until 4 today. So please, you have enough time to go down and actually look at the art after the conversation. And my last little prize is there are 4 of the fabulous posters. So I'll leave these in the back if you want to adorn your dorm rooms or your residences in general. You're welcome to grab one on your way out. So enjoy the conversation. And I'm going to try to gracefully move this mic. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah. Oh, Mike. At least you don't have to hold it.
Right? Okay. Hi, everyone. So this will be a very casual conversation between me and Cianne today. But we're going to be diving into Isole, A Voyage Among My Dreams, and really exploring some of Cianne's process and the different works that have informed the development of her art process. So the exhibit itself spans across 2 gallery spaces in our ramp if you haven't had an opportunity to see it yet. And it holds about 33 different pieces by Cianne that have been created over a variety of different decades. Some of them are earlier works that are currently now in our permanent collection from the 1980s, and some of them are very new works just created here in 2024. And so there's a good breadth, but I think one of the most beautiful things about it is you can really see this intentionality with how your style has grown, and to see different motifs and ideas and how they've developed across the mediums you use. So this is a quick view of our front gallery if you haven't had a chance to see it. But one of the works I wanted us to dive into right away to talk about is this gigantic work of 3 panels called Return Out. And this, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, is amazing. It has a bunch of different objects that have been assembled and worked together. And out of curiosity, how did you come up with the idea for this work?
Well, first I want to thank everybody for being, coming, and for you to having me here. I mean, it's been a really pleasure, and Britt and I have actually talked a lot, so it's like over the last couple of years, and always by Zoom, so it's nice to do this now in person. And but Ritorno, it started with this idea of return, and I was born in this country, but I returned. Well, it was my first time going back to Italy, but it was like a return. I was 16, and I was sort of returning the same age that my nonna came to this country. So, and when I stepped off, I realized I was home. It was like for the first time in my life, I felt like I was home in my own country. And there was something special about, even though you're born in one place, it doesn't mean it's your home. So Ritorno started with just wanting to do a long landscape. This breadth of, this space. And I had the panels made, and I sat and looked at them for a couple years. They were on the side of the studio, and this happens a lot. It's there, and I'm contemplating. And I'm a collector. I love objects. Objects are history. Objects tell stories. They're a life in their own, the ordinary as well as the evocative. And so my studio looks like an altar in itself, and it's got a lot of stuff in it. The other thing that was stimulating this was that I did a project called Stations of the Cross from a Woman's Perspective. And the materials were donated by the Cathedral of copper, marble, and wood. And so all the copper, this copper is still left over. I still have tons of copper. I have tons of copper from this place. I mean, it was wonderful. And marble. And I've dragged it from Louisville to California back here. It's, it just comes with me everywhere. And I loved the use of copper and the stiffness of it, though when you heat it, it melts and it bends and it's very fluid. And I also love paper. It's like, I love paper probably more than canvas, and I just love the tactile of it and touch. And it's soft, especially printmaking paper. So I wanted to combine them, that hard and that soft, that building and the feminine and the masculine. And so I thought, well, how am I going to do this? Time went on, and I would go back to Italy, and one of the things I noticed was that there was the graveyards there are very lively. Graveyards, where a cemetery is, and you see the people. It's not just a name, it's not just a date. You see images, and there's flowers, and it's a very, very like it's like going to this village. So that stuck in my head, and I love walls. All these things were playing in the parts of building Ritorno. And especially it's about people building. You build a painting, you build a sculpture, you build a wall, you build a life. You come to this country and you build a life. You go to another country, you build a life. You build families. There's like this building, and there's this growth, and there's recessions, and there's joy, and there's loss, and there's love, and tension, and all of that I decided to put in here. That's a lot of shit to put in there. And then you had to organize it. and how do I organize these stories? That's how it started. A long way around.
And it's an interesting work in the terms of earlier on when we were selecting items to go in this exhibit is one that we kept returning to, but as really kind of a landmark piece to have in the exhibit. And for those of you who have seen the exhibit, but then also when you have an opportunity to go look at it later, you can really see how the mass of it really takes up space. And I think when we think about terms of scale, what does it mean to have a work, have this much space? Also with this idea of how you're pulling in these materials from these different cultures, different stories, different histories, these fragments, it provides space for these stories to be experienced in an elevated way.
Yes. And because it's large, when you walk in, it feels large. But so it maybe overpower you, but when you get into it, you become large. And it becomes intimate. And you get to crawl through. And you see things, so there's this real push and pull, and there's this real conversation. And I like to do that with my work, is that, it's talking to you, with you, it's your experience, it's mine, but then it becomes yours. So Ritorno, for all its bigness, it's actually a very intimate space.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that piece within itself, I feel like, really encapsulates this process that you use called assemblage, which is a concept very similar to collage, but instead of just working with different paper and blending and concealing and putting them together, you're working with all these different objects. But then once again, how you're bringing in paper with metal and these objects and materials, you wouldn't necessarily see relationships. Most people wouldn't see relationships between. And you create a really visually rich plane for us to tinker and to uncover these kind of different relationships between the materiality.
Well, the materials are important to me. The metal, like I was a guest student at UC Berkeley while I was doing my graduate work. And I went to the sculpture department and I worked in steel. And it's ironic that my papa he was 100. He was an iron worker. He walked the beams, and he was an iron worker. And he used to take me down to construction sites. And I wanted to learn how to weld. And he goes, "No, girls can't weld." And I'm going, "What? What do you mean I can't weld? Of course I can weld." I ended up taking these welding classes through Brian Wall, and I loved it because it also reminded me of dance. You're heating up and you're sweating and you're moving the metal and you're sweating along with it and you're doing all this stuff. It's very physical. And it's funny because when I did start doing welding, my father sent me all his welding equipment and all his hats, everything to Berkeley for me to have. And we lived on the East Coast, so it was really approving. I love it. Anyways. It's so that material of the hard and the soft, it's the tearing, and the physicality is really necessary for me, because I started out as a dancer, which is very physical. Your body is your tool. But my body is still the tool, but I just extend it to the materials that I use. So we have to have this relationship, and that melting and that banging, and the only thing I didn't like was grinding, but that metal was like really important. And I prefer metal over wood. I have wood pieces, but I don't really like working with it as much.
That's interesting. I can also see that in terms like with metal, there's actually a form of like alchemy that really happens, right? This idea when you do heat it up, it like physically changes. But all of this, I think, really ties well into a question I had for you, which was about process. Like, process is very prominent in your artwork. And so I wanted you to speak a little bit, like, about what does that look like for you? Why is process important to you as an artist?
Because it gets you from one place to another. The end product, in the end, the work has to be on it. It has to work. It has to be in harmony. The process gets you there. And, you put things on, you go, "Oh, shoot, that doesn't work." You take it off. You make a mark, "Oh, that was good." Then you make another mark, and they have to have a conversation. And they have to be talking to each other. They have to work together. And I don't know how many times I've had pieces, and you do the last mark and you go, oh, damn, I just messed that one up. And then it brings you just another place. In the end, I'm not here. This is here. I mean, eventually, I'm not going to, I'm not going to be talking all the time. This is it. This is what I do. And then that process ends up here. And that's the final conversation that I'm having with it. But then you come along, the viewer comes along, and you're having it. And it's what you're seeing, and it's what you're feeling. And it's like, it's no longer mine anymore. It's in relationship to you. So the process is a way of getting there. And it's the materials, and I don't care what any artist will, they need to own up that materials really dictate a lot of the stuff we do. How many times have you walked down and saw something and you go, oh, I need to have this, and you don't know why you want it, or you need to have it, but you have it. And then eventually it becomes part of the piece. And you know exactly where you put it in the clutter that you have, and you go, ah, here it is, and it works. And that's the thing. It's just always having to work and then become the last breath.
Yeah. Okay. So I pulled these works. As Cianne knows, Sacred Cheese is one of my favorite series in this exhibit, largely because I became enchanted by the title of it. But I also feel like this series within itself speaks really well to how you approach your process in terms of how you pull from cultural heritage and stories of lore, and fold that into kind of how one idea of one piece will then translate to another piece.
Right.
And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that in regards to Sacred Cheese.
Well, Sacred Cheese, actually, if you look at the small one, I don't know if you can really read it. I was going to write it down, then I forgot. Is really the whole core of Sacred Cheese. It's these words, and it's to back up. I was, it's about the sheep of Sardinia and the shepherds who were transformed over, asked to go to Tuscany to create pepperonio cheese, okay, and to do other types of cheese, but the stipulation was the land was given to these shepherds, but they had to bring their own sheep. And so it was like a combination of the land of Tuscany and the island and the sheeps of Sardinia. And if anybody knows anything about, when you know about Italy, it's like the north and the south and the middle. Everybody's like, it's different. So the shepherds, their sheep are wild, so they're more wild. They're not fenced up. So they have to have a lot of land, and they eat. When they're eating the herbs, they're eating, or eating the fennel, or they're eating artichokes. That taste comes into the cheese. And of course, making cheese is very stinky. But so I was listening to the lore of the shepherds. And I was just writing down stuff, this secret combination, suffering herbs, because one of the things they were saying, climate control is making the herbs die faster, and it's affecting the cheese, and, all these things. And it just transported me to these places that I love, and I started doing a whole series, like, what is Sacred Cheese? What is the word sacred? How does this work for me? This is how my brain works. It's the center. And these words, I kept writing them over and over on different pieces of paper. And before I knew it, they were becoming part of the piece. And then this piece here was starting during the pandemic. Now this piece, another title popped in, Pablo Neruda, 20 Love Poems and a Song of Despair. Well, Sacred Jesus, they're in despair. We're in the pandemic. We're in despair. We don't have enough materials. People are dying. We're like lonely. We're this. And then I was thinking about a quote that Pacello had said, after death comes life. And also, I was listening to various music and thinking about during the pandemic, Italians are singing on the balcony to help us get through a lot of this stuff. So long story short, Sacred Cheese started to move into using the stretch canvas, and they're long, so they're very, this is like really tiny. This is only 5 by 7, and this is big. And I chose not to stretch it. I chose not to put gesso on it. And I used the materials at hand. And Sacred Cheese started to move over to this. And then this 20 Love Poems and Song of Despair started to move over with Montale in the lines and marks that I made. So all of a sudden, Sacred Cheese started becoming something else, but still with the thought of moving into these others about the herbs and the landscape and the plants and these beautiful sheep, and about what is it also like to be a shepherd? How many shepherds do you know? I mean, really, how often do you see sheep? How many people live that land? So, and I am a romantic, and I'm sure that's showing through right now, but that's sort of how it started, and it keeps growing. And Sacred Cheese, just, I don't know, something really, I love that title.
Well, actually, it's funny that you say that, because on our campus here, we have the goat herders come in the summer, and then we have all the goats and sheep that will then take down the grass in the hills. And so that was one of those jobs where I'm like, I wonder how you get qualified for this. How can you get into this? But I do really love with some of these pieces of how the process of you thinking through and taking all of these different stories and making these connections gets reworked through varieties of different scales and materials. And some of you, when you see this in person, it's kind of easier to dive into the physicality of it. But Cianne will often take older works and she'll cut and tear them apart and then put them in a different work.
Right.
And I think that also kind of pulls into this element that if something didn't work somewhere, it has this potential. And it ties back into this idea of process and thinking about time with work. And it's funny because when we live in a very capitalistic society and just, when you have assignments, there are due dates, there are this, but this idea when we're working through ideas and working through art, the time itself moves in its own way.
It does. And the work is time-based because it's a relationship. And I have bags of works that I tore up. And the bags, sort of become, they hang all over the place. And I can take the bag down and I'm going, oh, I was in this period, just by looking at the works. And I know that where they need to go, so I store them. And, I tear. And I love when I tear old pieces. I take the paper and I put them together like this. So when I'm tearing them, I'm not looking at the work. And I get a rhythm. Bump, 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 right? And I stop. And I look, and I sort, then I put them back together, I rip them some more with another rhythm, and I then look at them, and then I sort. And I keep doing this, sometimes they only come out 3 inches. And, so they become pieces in themselves, they become parts. Working with the Bay Area, working with Jay and Frank and Neri was whatever works. This piece, I think this is one of the pieces. I have a piece where I use aluminum. It's this tape that you use for wire, but it's aluminum and it's wonderful. And I just stuck it in the piece because it worked. I was patching a hole and then I thought, oh, I really like the way this looks with it. It makes sense. So I left it, or I'll tie things and go, well, yeah, that makes sense. Sometimes it starts out being just a practical thing, and then it turns out it really is part of the piece. And so that was the one thing I learned from it.
Yeah.
You do whatever it takes to make the work in harmony.
And that was one thing as well with Isole. It's opening in conversation with another exhibit called Visceral Processes, which includes work by Jay DeFeo, Frank Lobdale, and Manuel Nuri, who all really came out of San Francisco Bay Area in the 1950s. kind of co-merging with the beat movement and what became known as funk art. So this idea of pulling from the common and ordinary, using what materials were available to really make art centered into day-to-day practice, and that it was okay to explore kind of these kind of darker or rougher edges, torn edges of materials. When you're mentioning just this element of tearing, returning to these objects, we know that's something that DeFeo did a lot with her work, and I can see that direct thread within your work and your process.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, again, it's like you have to trust the relationship with you and your work. It's the conversation happens then. It's like when I'm in the studio, I'm not thinking about it, you know, what's out there in the sense of what's in and what's out. I don't care. It's what's happening between us. And sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow, sometimes, oh God, you always have a painting that's going to kill you. You know, it's like, oh, this is going to kick my ass, for better language. You know, and you know, it's just, you know, you just got to get through it. And sometimes you have to put it away. I'm not always good with that. You know, you have to put it away and you have to bring it back. And it's this really intimate relationship. It's a real commitment and devotion. And that was also, you know, I think was one of the things I learned. But the materials themselves were, the world is my art school. I mean, my art supply store. I go anywhere, everywhere. I don't care. You know, whatever works. If I find it on the ground, you know, I try to clean it up. But, you know, vintage clothing, old junk, metal, you know, I just, if it catches my eye and I know it might work someday, then I bring it back to the studio and it stays there.
So I wanted to pull this work in because this is one of the newer works by Cianne, and we were kind of laughing the other day because I literally basically plucked this off of your studio wall.
Like, wait a minute, I haven't even
I get some curators were over at your studio and they were like, "Oh, we want this one." And you're like, "Oh, it's already claimed." But with this work, one of the elements that I really loved about it was this bright colors, and to me, it had this very direct tie to Italy. But I was wondering if you could share a little bit about this piece.
Okay. I mean, like it is. This is 24. I mean, it was literally. I had just basically finished it, and the bright colors. Sometimes you just need them. You know, sometimes you just. It's funny because if I'm not around Italy that as long, this country's loud. You know. And this country's bright, and sometimes, and especially sometimes when you're with all the stuff that's going on in this world, sometimes you just need that beautiful, intense color, you know. And it's really, it's pretty direct. Yet again, there's a lot of layers in there. And I have to, because I can't remember the first line of this, but I was reading Montale, and it says, "At the times, climbing down," and that was when I started reading that particular poetry, for some reason I was on this cliff and I was climbing up and down. And it was boom, and then coming down again. And it just had this rhythm. But I knew I needed to have that left corner basically empty. I knew I needed that space. And the other thing I knew I needed was the arch top. And the arch top actually started because the first time it was an accident, and on another piece, is that when I did the rolls, when I had rolls of paper, when you get to the end, there's an arch, because in order to roll it, it has to be narrow. And you're going, oh, damn, I like this, you know. So I used it on another one, and then now I'm intentionally doing it. You know, because what was was like an accident turned into something that I really liked, and then the paper becomes a form in itself, and it makes me also think, because at the same time I was doing this, I'm painting on marble, which I love that because the form is already there, you know. And my problem is that I work on both sides, and then I'm not always sure which side I have to show, and I have to figure that out. I'm working on that. But it's so I had this on paper, climbing up and down a hill, listening and looking at the marks that I make. And there's textiles in there. There was a lot more textile in it. It was a velvet dress I used to have. I love it. And I took pastel and I rubbed on the velvet, and then I laid it on there. And then sometimes I would use it like an ink. It'd be more like a print. And then sometimes, I had a lot more on the bottom, and I ripped it all off. And when I ripped it all off, again, it was like an ink. There was like these marks, and then I would draw into them. So it's a lot of mark making. There's a lot going on that doesn't really show up here. And then I knew I had to hit it with these bold colors because I just needed the colors.
And I think that actually ties really nicely into the next element, how you had mentioned Montale. Mm-hmm. And I love how you pull from actual lines of poetry with the translation. And so actually on the left, I had asked Cianne early on in some of our conversations, how do you interact with this text when you're reading it? I had asked her to share the different poems with me before, and so I was diving into this whole element where there's all these different translations, right? And with Cianne being fluent in Italian as well as English, and working back and forth, you'll notice how she'll pull often from the titles, phrases in English or phrases in Italian, but then also from the different translations. And so I really liked this, and I'm glad you shared it with me about how just physical you got with interacting with the text and the titles.
And I do that because these lines, actually, it's the lines and the mark making in the poems that often are the compositions in the work. It's how I compose the work. And I do compose. It's like, I fine tune, but sometimes they're also the beginning of it. So when I'm reading the poems, and it's how I try to keep my Italian up, is because I have it in Italian and I have it in English, because I lose a lot of it. I mark them. But then when I don't want a word in there, I take it out. I scribble it out. It's like, it's like I really take liberal with the poetry and Montale. It's like, I don't really like that word. I'm going to move it around here. Or I don't need the he and the she and the it and the what and this. I just want these powerful words that take me someplace. So I take them out, and then then they become the piece. And then the piece of these words become the visuals for me. It transports me again to someplace else. I can go back to Monastrati and walk. I just have to close my eyes and I'm there. But these words help me get other places. And the lines just really organize my brain, and also it's just the mark making. I love mark making. And there's some that I do well, there's some that I'm learning. I steal from other artists, but I make that line myself. And that's one thing, again, you do take from other people, but you've got to have it be your own voice. So that blue line, I was probably thinking about that, but that blue line also had to be a one-shot deal. It's like, I only had one shot to put that blue line down, because otherwise I'd screw it up. I couldn't go back into it. It was and I had to be ready. That's the dancer part of me. You have to, that dancing. It's like, when you put that step in and right? It's like, or music. You hit that line and you know it. And so the poetry is really a starting point for me.
And I think what, for me, is so fascinating is how there's a lot of memories associated to when you work with pieces, right? But also at the same time, you're pulling from parts of culture. And in many ways, you're taking elements that are very personal and making them very universal. Something that as a viewer, you can come at with your own interpretations or experiences of these poems. Right. And I think that's a really interesting element to see folded in through how things work. Okay. You had mentioned the marbles, and I know we are a little bit tight with time, so I'm going to kind of move through some of these. I'm going to have you talk a little bit about this, because I do really think this is an important element to your process with these things that you call warm-ups. Would you share what that is?
So, Warm-ups are about dancers warm-up. You know, we exercise, and so I use these as my warm-ups. And I'll step back a little bit, because when I was a dancer for 20 some odd years, you know, I retired young, and then I get back into it. But when I said no, I'm off stage permanently. But that never really happened. I was moving into the art world. I was afraid I was going to lose gesture, you know. I mean, I thought, oh my God, my gesture is just going to go away. I'm going to dry up. I have to do all these things. And it's just like, you know, I'm drawing, and it's like, and I remember I did say this to Neri, was when I worked with him. He said, no. Felt like saying, honey, you ain't going to lose your gesture anywhere, you know. But he started talking to me about, well, just take paper, take books, take whatever, and just work on top of them. So I would take my paint stick, and I tear books apart, you know. It's like, and I just would lay them down. Okay, good, and I would just work, not thinking about it, not doing anything, just taking my paint stick and working on top, usually figurative, just to keep that gesture. Because I would, you know, it really was because I was afraid I was going to lose it. And then I would work with my left hand and right hand and and I would throw them on the floor, and they would just, you know, a couple hundred sheets later, I would gather them all up, you know, because they were being tossed. I didn't even think much about them. They were just being tossed. And I do this too, as over time they become dialogues with other artists I love, or they become dialogues with things that I enjoy, like clothesline, whatever, you know, flowers, you know, whatever it is, because it warms me up and brings me into an intimate space. And so they do become a dialogue. And I love Marino, love him, but I love him more as a painter. And in this country, most people don't even know that he painted that much. And so I was teaching, you know, I was a faculty member, and I had all these great Marini books, and none of the kids wanted them. So I thought, well, I'll take them. You know, they don't want them. I'll use them. I'll borrow the book, and then it stayed on with me. So Marini and I have gone back a long time, and during the pandemic, I decided, okay, you and I are going to have a conversation, and it was like 300 pages, and we did. But I became a little bit more. There are just the warm-ups, but then some of them I started going back into them and started having a deeper dialogue with them. And that's an intimacy with other artists, again, learning to shift your voice and responding. And sometimes I would just obliviate them, you know. Sometimes I would be in part with him, and sometimes, you know, we'd be side by side, you know. So I've learned that these artist books, or these artist warm-ups, that I call them, they become sometimes pieces in themselves, and they're, again, it's that process that gets you to someplace else.
Yeah. Early on when we were working on the exhibit, I really wanted to include these works because so often we'll see big pieces like Returno. And I think oftentimes there's this element, well, how do artists get here? You can't just start with these big ideas. And so I loved with the warm-ups how just intimate and how it became this just practice. And what does it mean to work and continue and to practice through something?
Yeah.
And there is a lot of that ties into visceral processes. The other exhibit, you're seeing a lot of works on paper from Jay DeFeo, Manuel Nuri, and Frank Lobdale. You're seeing how they return to different symbols and forms and objects, and they repeat them throughout. So this idea that there is this lineage of how this connects to larger pieces like Returno, but it exists in these different scales and moments.
Yeah.
Okay, we are short on time, but the bundles are great, so if someone asks a question about those, I would highly recommend it. This is a picture of her studio, and so I had the opportunity of going and seeing Cianne's studio into 2022. Yeah. And so you can really see how she hangs things up on the wall, how she can rearrange them through space. And then where I want to leave things before we open it up for questions is, what's one thing that you would like visitors to take away from your exhibit?
when you look at it, just, it's your dream, not mine. I'm opening a door, and I hope that, it's like, I think if you have a dream, or it takes you somewhere in a dream, I've done my job, but that dream is yours. It's not necessarily mine, and I really believe that. It's like we have a relationship, but then we put it out in the world so that you have one, and that's really what I want you to have, is your own dream there. I mean,
Okay. So let's open up for questions, everyone. If you have questions for me or Cianne. Yeah.
Cianne and Britt, thank you. Excellent talk. I have two questions. So on the Returno piece, I noticed that the dates were 2007 to 22.
yeah.
So that's 15 years.
Yep.
So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about, how you're doing that. Like, or do you have that piece up on the wall and you put something on it and then you're on to other things and then you put something on it? Or is it put away and then you take it out? I'm just curious how that over 15 years, or is it you started it, put it away, 15 years later you looked at it again, and then you finished it? Was it an ongoing kind of relationship, or?
Well, it started 2007. I did the majority of the work, and then but prior to that, I had the panels in my studio for 3 or 4 years. So it's actually even started before that, because I was looking at the panels. It was like, and part of it was it was a huge piece, and it made it's like, it was scary. It's like, damn, this is a big piece, and it was probably the largest I was going to tackle. But a lot of the work happened over the 5-6 years, and then I put it away. It was like I showed it, it was in a good place, and then I had it stored because my studio is only so big. But every time I had to take it out, I would look at it, and I would like, tweak it here, tweak it there. Oh, that part didn't work, and I'm going to shove it over here and take this part out. So it does. That's how most of the time it happens, especially a piece like that, because again, I can't store it if I put it in my studio, it's like half my wall, But a lot of the work happened over the first prior type, and then every time I pulled it out, I find myself tweaking it. You go in there and you go, oh, I want to, I have to like I can't do it here. I can't go in there and try to change something.
You can make that into a program.
I can try. It's like I've done it. And I told Britt that I have actually an emergency kit in this piece, because this came from cross country, and I'm going, oh shit, if it's going to get here, oh, maybe it'll be broken in little places, and I could fix it, do something different. But I would change it. But there is an emergency kit in the piece itself with stuff, so in case I have to fix it.
And last question: when you do the warm-ups,
yeah,
do any of them eventually turn into ideas that you'll take and put into larger pieces?
Well, yeah, the marks, the gestures, like, again, think of, when you're dancing, you're doing a step, right? You don't get it on the first time. You got to keep doing it over and over and over and over until it's embedded. So that's what those gestures are. Those gestures become so embedded in me that I don't think about it anymore. But I got to start someplace, It's like music. It's like the music I listen to, the tarantella I listen to. I listened to it for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, to the point where I don't have to hear it anymore when I'm working, because it's so embedded. So the warm-ups are really an element of training me and my marking, how to work without the music or whatever. And so it's a training process. It really does train you, at least it does me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm curious about what type of dance you started doing first. Like, what were you? Yeah.
Well, I was 4. My father made me take tap.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh,
It was what type of dance was like first?
my first form of dance.
Yeah.
I was 4 years old. I knew I wanted to be a dancer. I took tap. I hated tap. It's like shuffle ball change, please. I said, I want to be a ballerina. You know, my father was afraid I'd get big muscles. So he went to the pediatrician, my pediatrician, to make sure that I wouldn't get big muscles. And then when the pediatrician said, "Oh no, she you know, she's going to get strong, but it's not going to be buffed." You know, I mean, this is a cultural thing too. So I took ballet. So I was a classical ballerina, and it took me a long time to get on toe. You know, but actually it's what the age is now today, but they would push you to be on toe by 8 or 9. You know, it was pretty young, and I had falling arches sometimes, and I was like really struggling. Oh my God, I struggled over that. And so I studied in ballet, but I had a really smart dance teacher, and actually my parents actually turned down a stint for me at the New York City Ballet, because they didn't want to move to New York. Blessing in disguise in a way, because the reality is I was more of a modern, contemporary dancer. And in ballet, you can't I use my shoulders a lot. And, you can't do that. It's really more controlled, and I really wasn't, I wanted to be out of the box. And so she once said to me, I was about 11 or 12, she said, listen to your body. I didn't know what the hell she was talking about. So then I went to contemporary and did jazz. And then I retired, and then I went back and I did flamenco in San Francisco till did some damage to my foot. And then I just sort of stopped, and then I was in, I went back to jazz a little bit, and you never leave. And then I started doing the tarantella, more and more serious, and I'm always, once a dancer, you're always a dancer. You're just dancing different. So that was my path of dancing. It was pretty hybrid.
I kind of have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Of I guess, how do you see dance sort of inform the way you create your pieces now?
Well, I literally am dancing. There's pieces that I'm actually dancing on. It's about the mark making. It's about the gesture. It's about the color. It's about space. The paper and the panels or whatever I'm working on is really the stage. And how do I move from one place to another? And it's that contraction and release. It's I had to really learn art terms better. I didn't know them as well. And I would be doing critiques, and I'm critiquing with, dance terms. Okay, but it's the same thing. It really is. And so I'm just dancing different, a little more permanent. Well, today they have videos, so I guess they didn't have videos and things like that when I was dancing.
Okay, I think I saw a question right away over here. Go for it.
Would you say that with how long you work on these pieces and what you said about how an idea can carry through one piece to another, would you say that art is an evolutionary process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not a straight line. I mean, it's a think of it as more of a spiral. Spiraling, you start here, you move up here, you may go back down. It's not a straight line. I mean, it can be, but it's usually not. I mean, you have inspirations from your thoughts. That it'll evolve. I mean, it's transforming, correct? So it's sometimes I'm looking at something and I'm going, oh shit, I did that back in 1987. Where did that mark come from? I mean, it did a whole big series about the girl cat. And one day I was doing some other paintings, and I'm going, oh, the girl cat came back. Because I sort of have names, or I say, oh, this is a girl cat mark, oh, she came back. So I think it's not an A to, you may want to get to A to Z, but you're going to do a lot of circling around.
It's Fibonacci sequence.
You're doing this.
Come on, that was a good St. Mary's joke.
Oh.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, there's
you have to clue me in that. I want to know about that joke.
Okay. Lydia?
I heard you talk a lot about this idea of trusting yourself in your process, and you're saying that there's a rhythm when you tear, and if a mark isn't perfect, you need to make that mark again. You have one shot. So there's this, as an artist, I know that it's really important to have that trust in yourself, in your mark making, and your decisions. So how do you decide that something makes sense or works, and how do you develop that trust in your own art making?
Good question. Well, you develop the trust by years, by doing. You can't get it any other way. And, there isn't an artist in the world who will, if they tell you they never had doubts, they're lying. You have doubts. You just have to get through them. And you have to make a lot of work. You have to make a lot of crap, a lot of mistakes, and you have to have, to go through that. And then you get to that one and you go, I hit it. And then you start all over again. And you keep doing that. They don't call it practice for nothing. It's like you have to keep at it and hone in on your skills. And believe that mark, if it's coming from you and it's honest, it's honest. It may not be the popular mark that's happening around in the art world, but who cares? That mark is yours and make it you. So you have to that's where this trust starts to come in, and it doesn't happen automatically. And hell, I go through, I may be at a different level, but there are things that I want to do, and I'm going, oh, shit, I don't know if I can accomplish that, and I have to try. I'm just doing it here where, I wasn't, I can do this down here, but I have to keep making it mine and authentic, and you have to trust that mark that you've made it's coming from you. It's not coming from me, right? I didn't make it up, I mean, people have said, oh, you're a lot like Sam Twombly. I go, yeah, I am. I admire the man. But I'm not Twombly. Twombly's Twombly and I'm me. He was just born earlier. So he got to these marks sooner than me. But they're mine. And his are his. I will say, I look at his work and I will borrow his marks. I go, well, this is a pretty cool mark. But I have to make it mine. I have to ask you, what was the other question? Because I forget.
I think it was, I asked, how do you know when a work is finished?
Okay.
Or if something that you do makes sense or works or balances, how do you
know that?
How do you know that it's
done?
Finished. That it's done.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Because they're not always done when you think they're done. You go back and look at it and go, oh my God, I showed that. What the hell was I thinking? It's just like, I got to change that part, I would say though, most of the time I know when things are really done and I don't go back to them, my chest opens up. It's like you work from the center and all of a sudden it's like all this tension and tension and tension and tension goes up and then it's all of a sudden go, and I'm going, it's done. That's my telling. That's when it tells me I know I'm done. And then there are times when I think it's done and it's done at a good place, and then you look at it, hence you go back to it and go, well, this part is really a little awkward. This part doesn't really have the harmony I want. This part isn't really saying what I want. And then you go back into it. You give yourself permission to go back into it. But sometimes people get hung up and go, oh, I can't touch it. Why not? So it's again, it's not this is not a linear, it's not linear of A to Z. It is, but it's not concrete all the time. It does a lot of zigzagging, and it's really confusing. And the other thing is, find people. There's a few people I know that I really trust their eye. When I'm really stuck, I'll call them. Can you come over? But I trust their eye enough that they understand my work to give me their point of view. Doesn't mean I'll take it, but I trust their eye. And I respect them. And I, at times, will ask them that. But in the end, you still have to do it between you and the work. It still comes down to you and the work. And that is time and experience.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So a hand over here, then we can go over.
Hi. I really enjoyed hearing you just speak about this sort of sheer materiality of your process. But I also heard you talk about memory as also sort of a material that you're drawing on. I'm here with my writing as inquiry class, and currently they're sort of delving into their memories to sort of make a relationship with their own histories and their own identities.
Mhm.
So I was wondering if you had any advice for young artists as to sort of what helps you come into sort of a deeper relationship with memory in your process, and is there anything that doesn't sort of serve that process?
Doesn't serve the process.
Yeah.
Oh. I mean, that's a really good question. Memory is, I mean, we all make it, you know, sometimes memory can be deceiving and sometimes it cannot, you know, because we want to memorize things the way we want to. And I actually, at this point, I think that's okay. You know, it's like how it is with your story. You know, it ends up being your truth. I mean, like you said, I use memories more like a material. I mean, yeah, it is storytelling, but it tells me how to, for placement and things like that. I utilize it in a way that's, again, back to physical and concrete. So reality, it's like I'm making the dream my reality. And that's what the memory is. You're making your memory your reality. Yeah. And whether you're writing or you're painting or you're sculpting, there's muscle memory. And I think that's the other thing that you need to understand is that sometimes you're doing things that are like intuitive, but your muscles really do remember. And I really believe that, you know, it's that muscle memory that I really count on a lot. And yeah, I hear stories, you know, you have your families and they're telling you stories, and those are their memories. And they all sort of filter through. That's what the beauty about oral history is, you know, and that's bringing the past to the present. And I think artistically, you have the liberty to bring it in any way you feel works. And again, there's that harmony, and visually it has to work, or if you're a writer, it has to work word-wise or music. I mean, you are in relationship with another tool, but
Well,
I don't
one
know if
that
I'm
I thought
answering this
was
question well.
really interesting was how I got really intrigued by sacred cheese.
Right.
And when you told me the story, one of my first responses is, where can I like read about this? Like, where does this exist? And you were like, well, it's story. Like it's just. And this element where it's not just written down. It's not like I can go to Wikipedia and see this story narrated in a very specific way. It was this element where it was oral stories that had been collected, that you had sat with, reflected on, came back to, and it'd been reworked. And like learning for me as a curator working with your pieces was this idea there was this fluidness and liminal element with how memory and how dreams were approached. It wasn't this or that. It was this kind of emergence.
Yeah, you know. Because when I think of sacred cheese, you know, we talked about this. I think about the shepherd that I was talking to, you know, or the sheep that I saw on the hill, you know. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but I hope I got somewhere close.
Okay, I saw some hands over here as well. Yeah.
I was wondering on your paperworks, do you always go outside the perimeter with the collage?
Not always.
No, on this piece you do, on all of them.
Oh yeah, no. Sometimes I stay within the parameters.
What makes you like this one on the right?
This one here? This is on canvas.
That's on canvas.
It's on canvas.
This one's
That's
on
on
paper.
This is on paper.
Okay.
But also has fabric in it too.
It has fabric, you know.
Yeah, look at that. It looks like one of those magical hill towns in Italy. Beautiful.
Thank you.
And the arch allows your eye to just keep going.
Yeah.
It's really nice to have that at the top.
Yeah, because it allows you to breathe and have space.
Yeah.
Yes, and I like space. I really do. Sometimes I stay in the box and sometimes I don't. Maybe I was like, I always equivalent to when I was a kid. I had my aunt had we used to color together. I sort of like this story, but we used to color together, and she was always wanted to color one way. She was very meticulous. Oh my God, she was like so meticulous.
Inside the line.
Yeah, and not only that, she didn't like cross hatching. She would like, you color one way. I'm going, I don't want to color one way. I don't want to stay in the box. I don't even like what's outside of the box. I'm going to make my own environment. So I was always a kid that went inside the box sometimes because you have to stay in the box because it makes sense. But when it doesn't make sense, I go out of the box.
Okay. Thank you.
Sometimes it's as simple as that. And it works. If it works, it works.
Okay, so I'll hand it to you.
So my question for you is when you're creating these pieces of work, right, your artwork, even going through the process, who is your intended audience, or who are you trying to make this artwork for? Because at times, because I'm not like an avid art fan. Like the closest thing I know to artwork is like Jackson Pollock or Mona Lisa or like the Starry Night, like the Van Gogh book. Like how but like sometimes it's hard for me to connect with, especially like modern painting where you can understand it unless you are the one explaining it to me. I have no idea what's going on. Right? Okay. So like how do you get the message through? What you're trying to say, as well as who's the audience that you're creating these artworks for? Okay. Well, the first person is me. I mean, it's just me in the studio. It's like nobody's there but me, and we're talking. And I would say after that, the audience is whoever wants to look at it. And I would say to you, trust what you feel and trust what you see. Because what you see is what you see. It's not, you would need to spend time with things. Like I do probably want people to come back more than once, which is a good thing, I hope, at least for me. And every time they come back, they might see something new, which is good. But I would say for the audience, it's just like whoever's looking. And if you're looking, if you see something that speaks to you, then trust what it's speaking to you. And you're smart, and you can ask yourself, like, well, I'm looking at this and this is what I feel. That's accurate. Trust what you're seeing because your eyes aren't going to lie to you. They will tell you, and you may walk away and you may reflect and you may say, well, this was a bunch of crap. I don't want to deal with this. And that's okay too, because it's not meant to please everybody. But if something responds in you in that, then it's like that's your experience, and that's what it's for. Does that make sense?
On this piece right here, I know you said like you used the text to find like something very important for you. What really stood out to you when you were finding in the inspiration to use the text for your art?
I didn't quite hear what you said.
So what I was trying to ask was, I know how you explained that on this piece right here, you used the text to create your own art.
Right.
How did you find like those big standing out words for you to use for your artwork?
I just like them. And they take me someplace. And the words that I don't, it's usually the he's and the she's and the ands and the stuff that I don't really need to transport me, And there's just some text that just doesn't respond to me. At this time, I may go back into Montale's poetry. I mean, he's a complex guy.
and he deals with ordinary objects. He deals with loss. He deals with pain. I mean, he was like, he went through World War I. He saw a lot. He didn't like fancy words. He didn't have always a happy child. There was a lot that he dealt with. So I sometimes go back into him and I go, well, now I like this word because this takes me someplace. I could read him for the rest of my life and find things in him. Again, it's like going back, and finding new things that brings you forward. And there comes a time where you don't need to go back there anymore. You don't need to see the same person or look at the same work or the same text because you really exhausted it. And then you move forward. Like I read a lot of haikus. I don't read them as much anymore, but I might again, 10 years down the road, 20 years, but that's how those words come to me. And I circle. That's why I buy so many more books, because they all look like this. I mean, I rip them up and I put them back together. It's just like the bookstores love me because I'm always, can I have 3 or 4 of these things? And then I promise myself I always want a clean book that I'm not going to work in. It never happens. It just never happens. So, but that's a good question.
Okay, so a hand shoot up back there. Yeah.
Yeah, I know you mentioned like painting and sometimes like accidentally seeing like previous pieces of art in like a current piece.
Yeah.
How do you think that affects like do you think there's like that makes a connection between the two pieces, or like on what scale do you think that connects with past and present pieces?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand. Say the question again.
Okay, so you said you see past artworks sometimes when you're working previous pieces, like certain marks.
Yeah.
On what level do you think that like connects the two pieces, if at all?
Oh, okay. So, okay, this piece up here.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
I was going to move it to the bundle one.
okay. Let's go to the bundles. We'll go to the bundles. Okay, the bundles. All right, see that bundle over here? I'm Pena. Okay.
It's right by the figure, yeah.
There's a bundle. Okay, I did that in 1987, and then I pulled it out. The bundle didn't change, but then I pulled it back out and I reworked the piece because I thought, oh, Jesus, this is not this is not well, and I, reworked it. And I actually made the figure a little more prominent. But, okay, so that bundle, I'm going to tell you, I thought, oh, I'm going to have my children read my diaries. And I'm going, oh, hell, I'm not going to have them read my diaries. I'm going to, take them and seal them up and put them in a piece because, then it's, present, but, but I'm not going to have anybody read this stuff, because it's private. Private and public. You get a couple words, you get some words, but it's, for the most part, it's all private. Hence these bundles. When there's times I can't work big. I just can't. It's a lot of energy. And I love intimate works. And and I'm a pack rat, and I gather up materials. And I want them to stay a secret. I just don't want anybody to know about them. And I wrap them with materials. The core of all my work, though, has oil paint. I'm in love with oil paint. Oh, my God, I just lust for it. It's just gorgeous. It's like, I just always have. And it's been a love affair since 1980s, So everything has that oil paint. But now this bundle has fishing wire from my father. My father passed away. He was 102. We were very close, and I celebrate his life. He So he had a fishing tackle that he gave me. With a whole bunch of other stuff, lots of other stuff, and I started using it. I wrapped all these bundles. And it's this movement of this, and then this, and then this. And I love textiles. I've made textiles. I've done weaving. You know, I've done all that process stuff. And it's just that rhythm. It's a rhythm. And it's tiny. It has secrets. You know, it has, you can see the top part, and you have to wonder what's in the bottom part. And that, you know, you can wonder all you want. I may tell you if I want to tell you, or I may not. You know, that's the other thing. I get to tell if I'm around. I get to tell people if I want to share that secret or not. That's sort of fun. But think about that bundle and that bundle. They're really similar. You know, the bundles have become a piece in themselves instead of being part of it.
And that concept of how you often will reveal something and conceal something through a physical process. And how it travels across various different works.
And it travels over years. You know, I may do a whole series of bundles for like a couple months, and then I may not go back to them for a long time. And I, you know, it, like I said, I hate winter. Oh my God, I hate winter. It's so cold in my studio, and so I can't work big. That's often when the little pieces come, or these come. You know.
Hossein, I see
Yeah,
you
I
have a
just wanted
question.
to point out that it seems like everybody's when they look at the work, they see this mystery, secret underneath, something that's covered it. So it's, I guess, the palimpsest that seems to be the covering of these secrets.
Mm-hmm.
And a mystery is no longer interesting once it's revealed.
Right.
It's only interesting once it's covered.
Right.
The secret itself, if it's exposed, is no longer a secret. Therefore, the work actually loses everything that made it interesting in the first place.
Right.
But I wanted to ask a question about something else in the work. A lot of people look at the work, and you mentioned the fact that many of the works are reworking of the works that previously existed.
Mm-hmm.
So working with composite material and working with things that already existed creates a lot of possibility of accidents, errors, things that you no longer have control over. And all this talk about reconstructing memories, dreams, intentions, etc., gives a picture of something that's completely controlled. But these accidents, errors seem to be some of the more interesting parts of the work that reveals itself. It is like when Helen Frankenthaler actually did all the, I'm not comparing your work to hers, yours is yours, hers is hers, but what I'm saying is that the accident, the possibility of error, the possibility of something that we consider an error and later turns out to be actually the essence of the work itself seem to be the more interesting parts that seem to kind of come forward. So can you talk about it? And I want my students to understand that they hear a lot of these things about inspiration, intentionality, but sometimes it's the accidents and the errors that might be the most interesting part of the work.
Yeah, I mean, they happen all the time. You know, it's recognizing the accident that is good. That's what recognizing the accident that doesn't belong there. You know, so it's that recognition. You know, it's like, you know, you might knock over a piece, like you might knock over some ink, and you're swearing up a storm, and then you let it dry, and you're going, damn, this is good. This is like, now I know where it's a starting point. It could be a starting point. I mean, the work is, I mean, I'm really conscious about many of the things where I place. I mean, it's a conscious choice, but that's over time too. So there's a give and take with the accidents. It's again learning when the accidents work and when they don't. And if you saw my studio, there's a lot of parts everywhere. Like sometimes I just make parts. They're just parts. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I'm just making a part, and I put it aside. Then all of a sudden that part will move into like places like this wall. Okay, this wall started out with me just putting things down. Okay, I knew they didn't belong in the piles. I knew they weren't going to be going away. They needed to be on the wall for some reason. Easy access, maybe. All of a sudden, this wall now has become a piece in itself. I put I put something way up on top, and now I just have to find a place so I can cut the wall out and mount it so I can put it someplace. But it started out, just like putting stuff up, so those accidents, become, reality. It's like,
I guess it was the wrong choice of words. I meant chance more than accident.
Chance, yeah. I mean, you do. There is that. I mean, the chances. It's like, you sort of throw the dice and you see where it lands, and then you're finding out how to make that work. Again, it's always coming down to trying to make the work have, for me, harmony. Is fine tuned. It's almost like if I wanted to make it look as sloppy, I'm making it look sloppy anymore. It's not sloppy because I can't do it. It's sloppy because I want it to be that way. Is that like, I think I answered your question. I'm not sure if I did.
Let's take one more question.
I am really intrigued with that blue line in Mediterranean. I loved the way you talked about it, and I wondered how much of the piece was completed before you decided it, because most of your gesture is on the bottom half, and without the blue line, your eye stays down there, but the blue line just opens it up and makes your eye go up, and it's just beautiful. So I wondered if was the piece mostly done when you decided to put that in?
The piece was done when I put the blue line in because I knew it needed it.
It's just wonderful.
And it was a one shot. Remember when I talked about a one shot deal? If I was
too thick or too thin,
I would have screwed the thing up and it would have had to it would have turned into something else.
Yeah.
So the blue line was like the final bam. Right the final there. And it had to work.
Well, it opens it up.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a really great place to finish things for us with that final
bam.
One thing I would like to put a nod to is that we do have a student involved with the museum that has created a program called Assemblage, where they will be working through different forms of music, dance, and poetry, and it'll be occurring through different dates of the semester. Our next one will be Sunday, September 29th, if you're interested in attending, and all of those programs can be found on our website. So thank you all for attending, and we do have our opening celebration tomorrow from 5 to 7 p.m. if you would like to attend that as well. Thank you.
Take more food.